right, welcome back, everybody, to our special live coverage of the Sean Diddy Combs case. I'm Jesse Weber. Thank you so much for joining us and also for being so patient with us as we came back. So for the past 2 hours, we have been covering for you in real time about what has been happening in that federal courtroom. It was the issue of bail, now being heard by Judge Arun Subramanian. This is the first time this judge has heard this issue after Sean Combs has been denied bail on 2 separate occasions. And it seems, based on the arguments put forward by the defense and also put by the prosecution, that he may be open to bail for Sean Combs. Now, clearly, as he said, this wouldn't be a situation where he'd be at home confinement in Miami, but it would have to be in New York. The defense, talking about how strict these conditions would be, even said they're more stringent than what you see at the MDC, the Metropolitan Detention Center, where Sean Combs is currently housed. You heard objections from the prosecution saying that he had been reaching out to witnesses and victims, that he had been engaging in obstruction, that he is a violent individual, that he is a danger to society. The judge heard both arguments and said he will make a decision early next week. The question becomes, will Sean Combs be home for Thanksgiving? That could be a realistic possibility here. And he also said that he wants letters from both sides on Monday about what Sean Combs is allowed to communicate and what he is not allowed to communicate with. Because the big issue was, is he allowed to present social media posts about his family, his life? There was a back and forth about whether or not he can, talk about, reverse the narrative for himself, or whether or not that is trying to improperly influence a potential jury pool. So you heard a lot of back and forth. Big theme was whether or not he should be allowed out, considering Mike Jeffries, the former CEO of Abercrombie & Fitch, who was also charged with sex trafficking and arrested recently, he was let out on a $10 million bail package. Sean Combs was proposing a $50 million bail package, private 24/7 security. At least 3 security guard members would be watching him. No internet use, no phone use, limited to his conversations with his attorneys, only a limited amount of visitors. So the judge is taking all of this under advisement, which seems to be a wise decision. And by all accounts, we'll have a decision about Sean Combs' bail next week. Now, I want to bring in Elizabeth Millner from Law&Crime, our very own. She was in that courtroom for the hearing. She's outside of that federal courthouse right now. Elizabeth, good to see you. What did you see? What were your observations inside there?
Yeah, Jesse, a lot of interest in today's hearing for sure, especially with the whole debate on whether or not Sean Diddy Combs could actually go home or at least be at home in time for Thanksgiving. I will say that I arrived to the courthouse around like 12:15 today. Not a lot of people out, so I thought we actually came here a lot early. So when I went inside the courthouse, I was actually surprised to see the amount of reporters that were already in line waiting to go inside that hearing. Now, I got inside the courthouse probably about 45 minutes before the hearing started, and probably at least 15 other journalists and lawyers were ahead of me in the line. So I was actually very lucky to get a seat today. Now, they actually moved the courtroom to a different location than it was on Tuesday's hearing. Again, that was an emergency hearing, but for this scheduled hearing that's been on the calendar for about a few weeks now, they had it actually at the top floor, so a lot more people were able to get inside that courtroom. And let me tell you, a lot of people were inside that courtroom in that hearing, even members of the public as well too. I feel like I saw some teenagers kind of wanting to know as well too what was going on inside that hearing, because I think they also probably wanted to get a glimpse of Diddy as well too. But let me just kind of paint a picture to our viewers about what you kind of see when you walk inside that federal courtroom. So of course when you first walk in, you're going to see the gallery. You're going to have a left-hand side, a right-hand side. The left-hand side is for some of the defense attorneys as well as members of Combs' family, other public interest, and on the other side it's going to be some extra attorneys from the government side as well as all of the reporters, and we were really kind of body to body inside that courtroom. Then when you kind of go outside of the gallery, then you have the defense table, then you have the prosecution's table, and then you have the judge obviously on the bench. So it's a little different from how when we normally cover trials. You have the defense on one side, you have the prosecution on another side. So a lot of us on the reporter side, we were kind of anxious to see if Diddy's kids were going to be at the hearing today. And they did. They arrived. They were in unison. They all came in holding hands together, too. And Sean Combs' mother, Janice, was also in that courtroom, too. But another person who I found particularly interesting to be inside that courtroom was LaWanda Lane. Now, she is the best friend of Kim Porter. And as we have been reporting on, she has been taking care of Sean Combs' twin daughters, Delilah and Jessie, while Combs has been locked up inside that federal detention center. But whenever they came in, it was kind of different from when all of the family had to come in during that October hearing, and that it went silent. That wasn't necessarily the case. A lot of people were kind of whispering and talking a little bit back and forth and inside the gallery. Then they all came in. Again, they were all holding hands. They all sat down beside each other. And then, of course, court proceeded and everything like that. I was expecting some moments of like maybe some tearing up, because remember, and I'm sure you've already told our viewers this, when they were kind of discussing the freak-offs, the assault video that was released by CNN earlier this year, as well as just some of Diddy's conduct, or alleged conduct, I should say. You know, I can imagine just being 17 years old, I'm specifically talking about Jessie and Delilah Combs because they are still underage here, that it can be hard to listen to your father's alleged conduct and just hearing just kind of the inner details of what all is going on. Obviously, it's been making the news everywhere. It's not really a secret, but at the same time, to be inside a courtroom for 2 hours and kind of listening to your father's conduct, I can imagine to be hard. But from my side and from what I saw, I didn't see much of an emotional reaction or anything like that as far as it coming from Diddy's children. And so they pretty much kind of stayed forward, kind of kept their eyes on what the judge was saying, what the defense was saying, obviously what the government was saying when they were making their arguments. So I didn't see any type of actual emotion whenever they were making their arguments. But again, I can only imagine what may have been going on in their head as well too. But it's also significant that they were in the courtroom because, as I mentioned on Tuesday, they weren't here on Tuesday, and it was probably likely because it was an emergency hearing. I'm sure flying all the way out from Los Angeles or possibly Miami can be a lot to do in the matter of just getting 24 or 12-hour notice. And so, you know, it wasn't very surprising that they were all inside the courtroom. But again, it's significant too because the government alleges that they are all doing this as kind of like a PR stunt and kind of in a way to sway the jury into making them seem like a unified family. I mean, we've seen this before in trials, and I want to kind of make a clear distinction on the comparison I'm about to make here. I mean, we've seen this before in trials, and I'm talking specifically about the Alec Murdaugh trial, where, you know, Alec Murdaugh's family came inside that courtroom as well too. So it wasn't very surprising that he had his family there to kind of back him up. But I will say, just like on Tuesday, whenever Diddy did come into the courtroom and how he beamed and how he looked at every single person in the gallery, it wasn't like that this time. So when he came inside, it was still in that khaki jumpsuit. He, again, looks kind of grayish, a little bit like that, a little thin. But at the same time, you know, being in jail or a federal detention center for the past 2 months, obviously that's going to kind of wear and tear on anybody, including somebody like Sean Diddy Combs. But as soon as he came inside that courtroom today, he beamed up immediately, looking straight at his family. And that was pretty much the only people he kept eye contact with outside of his attorneys. So he looked immediately at his family. He blew kisses to them all, kind of like a little like I love you, mouthing of the words type of thing. And even before the judge got on the bench, he turned to them once again too, to kind of just mouth a little, like, you know, like it felt like he was just happy to see them, I should say. And then of course when he sat before he sat at the defense table, he hugged every single one of his attorneys. But again, like I said Tuesday, you know, Diddy knows that a lot of eyes are on him at this time. So there's not going to be a moment where we don't see what we expect to see of Sean Diddy Combs, if that makes sense. We're going to see somebody who's not going to appear defeated. We're going to see somebody who is going to appear with smiles. So that way, I think he's also kind of signaling to the world that he's okay in a way, but at the same time, maybe reassuring his family, especially his daughters, who, again, the twins, Jessie and Delilah, are just 17. Chance just turned 18, but with the exception of his youngest daughter, who is 2-year-old baby Love, who is probably with her mom over in California, I would assume, but I just don't want to speculate there. But of course, when when there wasn't a decision made, everyone was kind of ushered and rushed out of the courtroom. So I didn't get that last glance of maybe a last blown kiss to his family or to his mother or anything like that. But at the same time, you know, excuse me, that's pretty much what we can expect from Sean Combs.
Let me ask you this, Elizabeth, and that was a great recap of what you're our eyes and ears. We don't have cameras in that courtroom. Unfortunately, we're not going to have cameras in that courtroom. So you are our best eyes and ears about what is happening there. I broke down the legal arguments and what was said between the prosecution and the defense and Judge Subramanian. From Judge Subramanian, though, his demeanor, the way he was asking these questions to the prosecution, did it seem to you like he was skeptical of the prosecution's arguments? Did it seem like he was pushing them a little bit more? The reason we're asking is, does he seem open to Sean Combs getting bail? I know he's reserved judgment, but there's one thing to report on what he was said. There's another thing, you got a glimpse of the way he was asking the questions. What's your take on that?
I think it kind of stems back to, with this case, you really have to dot your I's and cross your T's. I think he was asking both sides very important questions. When he was specifically talking to the government, I think he was trying to also make it clear, it did feel like he was open to it. To answer your question, it did feel that way. I was actually kind of surprised by that aspect as well, too, because, going in, and I shouldn't have made that assumption in the first place. I was like, no way could this ever happen. But at the end of these arguments, I'm like, maybe it's possible that this could actually happen. I think it was kind of interesting that moment where, Mark Agnifilo mentioned his home in Miami, and Judge Subramanian was like, oh, okay, absolutely not. And then they suggested that apartment on the Upper East Side. But as far as the government's kind of arguments that they were making, it seemed like the judge really just kind of wanted to press to make sure that they were crossing all their T's and dotting all of their I's. And I kind of have to give him credit a little bit here, because I think sometimes in the court cases that we do cover, we see that a judge can side with one particular side as opposed to the other. But I feel like for both sides, he was kind of playing it fair on both ends, kind of making sure that he was that both sides were explaining everything that he needed to know before he makes his final decision next week.
And we will see what that decision will be. Elizabeth Millner, thank you so much for going in there. Thank you so much for reporting to us. And I know it's a rainy, cold day in New York, so really appreciate you taking the time. Elizabeth Millner, everybody, thank you so much.
Thanks, Jesse.